Hey everybody, and welcome back to Submarine History. Today, we're going to take a little time and talk about the various anti-aircraft weapon configurations that U-boats utilized during World War II, something that you may have heard referred to as a Wintergarten or U-Flak. I'm doing this briefing because recently I was listening to another naval history YouTube channel where a viewer asked the host a question, how good were U-boat AA defenses in 1942? I thought the answer was a little vague or nonspecific, which is unfortunate because it's a really interesting area of U-boat design and operation. So we're going to set the record straight on the subject today. But first, read the description to this briefing. It has relevant related references and links. Last, but not least, thank you to the United States Naval Institute for all they do preserving and promoting world naval history. The work USNI does is invaluable. Consider supporting USNI with a donation or membership. If you have any questions or comments regarding this briefing, post them below in the comments section. I also have a Discord for more in-depth discussions. You can find an invitation link on the channel page. For this briefing, our primary reference is Erich Groener's book, German Warships 1815 to 1945, Volume 2, U-Boats and Mine Warfare. U-Boat.net was also a primary resource, and a few other websites. It's an obscure area of U-boat history, so there's not a lot of information out there on the subject. We'll start the briefing today by talking about the evolving threat of aircraft to U-boats, and then we'll have a lot of pictures showing the various AA defense configurations over time that were employed. What we're not going to do is get into a technical discussion of the 20mm and 37mm gun types that were used. But what I have done is put a link in the description to this video, which will take you to the NavWEP's webpage, and that has a detailed information on all the AA guns used by the Kriegsmarine, including U-boats. If you want to know more, give me some questions in the comments, or join the Submarine History Discord, link in the channel banner, and ask your questions there. That gives us the chance to have a better discussion on the subject. Okay, so let's hit it. And I'm just going to be reading these slides here. But we're going to start by talking about the threat of aircraft to U-boats in 1939. At that point, no British aircraft are equipped with radar. Airborne anti-submarine warfare detection and weapon assets were limited. U-boat lookouts often hear and or see aircraft first. And only 2 U-boats are sunk by aircraft between 1939 and 1941. January 1940, British begin to deploy the ASV Mark I airborne surface search radar. The system was considered unreliable and high maintenance with short detection range. ASV Mark I operates in the 1.5 meter band, that's VHF. It has poor resolution and 3 to 6 mile detection based on altitude. There was a long-range ASV mod called LRASV, and that increased detection range up to 10 to 15 miles. So fall of 1940. The ASV Mark II had been in development since early 1940. It was also a 1.5 meter radar with improved engineering and build quality with a theoretical 36-mile range. And the first successful attack against a U-boat is in November 1940. With this new system, aircraft attacks were up 20% by mid-1941, including successful night attacks. And there are 31 U-boats that are sunk by aircraft in 1942. So March of 1943, the ASV Mark III radar begins being deployed to aircraft. This is 10 centimeter radar, that is the S-band, with improved resolution, engineering, and build quality, theoretical 36-mile range. And this neutralizes METOX as a defensive measure for U-boats. METOX was a French-made commercially available radio receiver direction finder that operated in the same band as the ASV Mark I and II radars. The Germans appropriated them for use in U-boats. And METOX actually was the first bit of proper electronic countermeasures employed on U-boats. Okay, fall of 1944, the British begin to deploy the 3 centimeter radar system, which is X-band. and that has sufficient resolution to detect U-boat snorkels. So we have approximately 765 U-boats lost during World War II, and of that total, 660 were lost in combat, and approximately 50% of combat losses were from aircraft attacks alone. So this was a significant problem. Okay, now for the fun stuff. So here we have a profile view of a Type 7B early in the war and a Type 7C from later in the war. At the start of the war, the Type 7s had one single 20mm cannon for AA defense, and that's an 88mm deck gun not designed for AA use. Now look how the aft end of the bridge drops straight down to the deck. Now look at the profile for the Type 7C from 1944. See the lower extended platform with additional AA guns? Spoiler alert, that's the Wintergarten, and we'll get to that in more detail in a couple slides. But let's look at some of these. Since we're looking at these two images, let's look at a few other things that are different. By 1944, as boats are coming in to get their snorkels installed, they're taking off the deck gun, because at that point in the war, you couldn't be on the surface really for any reason, for really any amount of time. And on the Type 7C, you see the snorkel. You don't have that on the 7B from 1940, and we no longer have that net cutter bow anymore. Okay, let's take another look at the early Type 7Cs. In this case, this is the U-69 from World of Warships, but you can see the 88mm cannon, and it's obscured. We're going to see it, but there's the single 20mm cannon on the bridge. There's like that little balcony. Okay, and here's a close-up view of what we would expect to see from a Type C in like 1940. But you can clearly see the 88mm duck gun and then the single 20mm cannon on the bridge. So as we previously learned, 1942 is the year that aircraft began to put the hurt on U-boats. And this does not go unnoticed by the Kriegsmarine. AA armament had been minimal, but because of British advances in radar, it put the Kriegsmarine in a spot where they had to immediately address the issue of increasing aircraft effectiveness. The first thing that was done was retrofit boats with extra AA guns in a manner that would only require minor modifications to make the bridge wider in order to accept the extra guns. For Mediterranean U-boats, two ERRATA twin 13.2mm machine guns were added to the bridge, where the existing single 20mm cannon was located. Pretty a crowded arrangement, but it was something fast that they could do while working on better solutions. And this is Turmbau 1, and that's German for conning tower, or Bridge Modification 1. At the same time as the Mediterranean boats were being modified, Bridge Modification 2 was being worked on, presumably for boats outside the Med. In this picture, we see a lower platform extending aft from the bridge. That's what was called the Wintergarten. And that was a small greenhouse addition to a home that would extend the family's garden, in Germany. For this modification, there are now two single 20mm cannons, one on each platform. Now, some Type 7 boats couldn't accept the addition of the Wintergarten, notably the Type 7D mine layers. So they had their two single 20mm cannons on a widened bridge, and that was Bridge Modification 3. For the Type 7, Bridge Modification 4 offered the best compromise between AA performance and boat handling and stability, and it becomes the standard arrangement for AA defense on the Type 7. The standard version of this modification is a single 37mm automatic cannon on the Wintergarten and two 20mm cannons on the two twin 20mm cannons on the bridge. However, there were different variations of this modification, and on the Wintergarten, you could see a quad 20mm cannon or a dual 37mm cannon. Side note, people will say the 37mm cannon was garbage. Early in the war, the 37mm SKC/30 cannon was used. Now, that was a semi-automatic manually loaded cannon, and it wasn't great. But that eventually is replaced by the 37mm M42 and M43 cannons, which were automatic magazine-fed weapons. Okay, so just wanted to point that out. Okay, and a couple of pics from the U-995, which has bridge modification 4. Okay, and here's a close-up of that bridge. The Germans were continually trying to improve the AA gun arrangement. Bridge modification 5 consisted of 4 twin 20mm cannons, and bridge modification 6 was an extended version of modification 4, where a platform was added in front of the bridge with an additional twin 20mm cannon. Both of these mods were tried on a limited number of boats, but were considered unsuccessful. Bridge modification 7 never left the design board, but it was intended to consist of 4 single 37mm cannons. Okay, now we come to the U-Flaks, a specific variation on the Wintergarten concept. As we previously said, U-boats were getting hammered crossing the Bay of Biscay, and the idea was to provide them escorts outside the range of German surface ships. That was the goal of the U-Flaks. This AA gun arrangement provided 2 quad 20mm cannons and a single 37mm cannon. These boats carried a reduced torpedo load of 5 torps to compensate for the additional weight topside from the guns. 7 Type 7s were planned for the conversion, but only 4 boats would get the mod. They deployed in June of 1943, and for a couple months they were successful in driving away unsuspecting RAF aircraft while they escorted U-boats leaving or returning to France. When it could be done, 2 U-Flaks would escort a U-boat. If 2 U-Flaks escorted a Type 7C with its own bridge modification 4, that would give that group of boats 20 20mm cannons and 3 37mm cannons for self-defense. That's formidable for a single aircraft to negotiate. However, the British responded by calling in surface forces to deal directly with the U-Flaks. And because of that, the project would be abandoned, and those 4 Type 7s were converted back to the standard Wintergarten modification. And here's a photograph of the bridge for the U-441. And here's this is cool. This is a little 3D model that you can really see clearly how they set it up. Okay, moving on to the Type 9s. That Type 9 from 1938 doesn't show the 37mm cannon after the bridge, so that was clearly a later addition. And when that 37mm cannon was added after 1938, it was the less desirable manually loaded semi-automatic version. Bridge modifications begin in 1943 for the Type 9s, and those modifications would evolve as they did for the Type 7s. This is the small Wintergarten with 2 single 20mm cannons and 1 single 37mm cannon. This is the Type 9 version of bridge modification 4, and in this case it's 2 twin 20mm cannons and 1 twin 37mm cannon. And up close of that Mod 4 bridge, this is from World of Warships. Notice that they modeled 2 single 20mm cannons, which I think is an error on their part, but it is possible that they had imagery of the U-190 from an earlier time, as there were supply chain issues, so sometimes they had to settle for single barrels until manufacturing could meet everybody's demands and they could get the twins. The Type 92s had their own Wintergarten. This is their large Wintergarten with a quad 20mm cannon and 2 20mm cannons. And this is our opening slide. So we know that this is a Type 92 from its Wintergarten arrangement. And then last but not least, even the Type 2s got some extra AA love, specifically the Type 2Bs, which went to the Black Sea. And this is what that modification looked like. It was 2 twin 20mm cannons. The boat's too small to really have a Wintergarten, so they did the best that they could with that. And then in this slide, this is an example of 2 other Type 2Bs that were part of the Black Sea Fleet. And here you can see a little bit more clearly the twin 20mm cannon forward of the conning tower, and then the twin 20mm cannon on the bridge facing aft. So let's talk about U-boat AA effectiveness for a moment. 120 aircraft were shot down by U-boats for the loss of roughly 30 U-boats, either sunk during the attack or due to being located by other forces shortly afterwards and sunk. It's unverified, but accounts suggest upwards of 700 British aircraft were damaged by U-boats. Now, if a U-boat was able, it was always in its best interest to dive and try to escape for staying on the surface and fighting it out. You know what? But sometimes it just couldn't be helped. So, were U-boat AA defenses good in 1942? They were not, which is why the Germans put so much effort into improving AA defenses, and it became another element in that continuing technology and arms race in the Battle of the Atlantic. The real solution to the aircraft problem was for U-boats to go underwater full time, which we talked about in briefing number 15, U-boat snorkels. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the briefing. Leave your questions and comments below. Come over to the Submarine History Discord and say hi. Till next time, peace out.